My name is Lydia Prescott. When I was 17, my parents threw me out of the house because I was pregnant. I can still hear the sound of that door slamming shut. It didn't just end a night, it ended a childhood. I slept under bridges, shaking in the cold, whispering to a baby I'd never get the chance to hold. That night, I made a promise to myself. One day, they would remember the name they tried to erase. 20 years later, they came back. Not to say sorry. Not to ask for forgiveness. They came back to sue me for the fortune I built from nothing, for the empire born from the ashes of their rejection. They wanted a share of my success, after abandoning me when I had nothing. But what they didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment my whole life. I was no longer the girl crying in the rain. I was the storm. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about rebirth, how pain became power, and how silence became the loudest victory. Welcome to Revenge HouseUSA, where every episode exposes betrayal, justice, and transformation. Stay until the end, because my twist will leave you breathless. Don't miss the next turn of fate hit. Subscribe now and watch the moment when everything flips. I still remember the smell of burnt cinnamon from Mom's candle the night my life collapsed. Our house in Portland was silent, too silent, when I walked in holding that tiny stick with 2 pink lines. Dad sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through real estate listings like nothing mattered. When I whispered, "I'm pregnant," the air froze. He looked up, slow, calculating like he was pricing the cost of disappointment. "You're 17, Lydia. You've just destroyed every plan we had for you." Though, his voice was so calm it cut deeper than if he'd screamed. Mom didn't even look at me. She just set her glass of wine down and muttered, "We expected better from a Prescott." And then came the words that cracked my world open. "You're not welcome in this house anymore." I thought they were bluffing until Dad stood, grabbed my suitcase, and tossed it near the door. 10 minutes, he said. "Pack whatever you can. Now." Our family photo, the one from last Christmas, was turned face down on the mantel. The sound of the frame hitting wood echoed like a final verdict. When I tried to call Ryan Whitmore, my boyfriend, he didn't answer. The next day, his parents' lawyer emailed me, "Do not contact Ryan again." I realized I was completely alone. The Oregon rain started that night, cold, endless, judgmental. I slept under a bus stop, my backpack for a pillow, one hand over my stomach, whispering apologies to the baby I hadn't even named. People passed by, pretending not to see the girl with swollen eyes and shaking hands. Every raindrop felt like a punishment. Every gust of wind a reminder of what I'd lost. By the third night, hunger gnawed so deep I thought I'd disappear. When dawn broke, I stared at the rising light and made a silent vow. I'll make them regret every tear they made me shed. I'll rise so high they'll choke on their own pride. At that moment, Lydia Prescott, the obedient daughter, died. And something else was born, a quiet, merciless fire. The nights in Portland stretch longer when you have nowhere to go. By the end of the first week, I stopped feeling cold. That scared me more than the rain. I learned which coffee shops would let you sit for warmth without buying anything, which alleys were safe from drunks, which dumpsters behind Powell's bookstore had the least spoiled food. Survival wasn't living, it was just staying in motion so the pain couldn't catch me. The city moved on without me. Dad still sold homes. Mom still hosted her charity brunches. Meanwhile, I lived between street lamps, watching families laugh through glass windows I could no longer touch. At night, I whispered to the baby growing inside me. "I'm sorry," I'd say, pulling my knees close. "I'll find a way, I promise." But promises didn't fill a stomach. They didn't warm frozen fingers. When Ryan's voice echoed in my memory, "We'll figure it out together, Lyd." I wanted to scream. He'd deleted me like an email he didn't need anymore. And the silence of his absence hurt worse than my parents' rejection. The second month hit hard. I woke one morning behind a grocery store, dizzy and pale. A man passing by threw a coin and said, "Get help." I laughed. Help? From who? I had no address, no friends, no family, no one who would even say my name. Then came the fever. My body betrayed me the way everyone else had. I remember collapsing near the Willamette River, the sound of water mixing with traffic as my vision blurred. For a moment, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe it was easier to stop fighting. But something inside, something small but fierce, kept me awake long enough to crawl under a bridge. When I woke, dawn light crept across the concrete. A stranger's shadow fell over me, an older woman in a wool coat, a scarf blowing in the wind, holding a cup of coffee. "You'll catch your death out here," she said softly. Her voice carried warmth I hadn't heard in months. I wanted to tell her to leave me alone, to not look at me like I mattered. But when I met her eyes, I couldn't. There was no pity there, only recognition. Like she'd been where I was once. She handed me the cup. "Drink this. My name's Eleanor." The coffee burned my tongue. It was the first warmth that didn't fade. That morning, something shifted. The girl who'd spent months dying in silence finally breathed again. The car smelled like lavender and rain. For the first time in months, I was sitting somewhere warm. Eleanor Walsh's hands gripped the steering wheel with quiet certainty, the kind you only earn from surviving your own wars. Her voice cut through the hum of the heater. "Eat. Don't argue." She passed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. I devoured it before realizing tears were slipping down my face. Eleanor didn't flinch. "You've been invisible for too long, haven't you?" Her words sank deep. No one had seen me since that night. Not really. She brought me to her home, a converted farmhouse on the edge of Portland, surrounded by old pines and the distant sound of rain on metal roofs. Her golden retriever, Murphy, wagged his tail as if I already belonged. She showed me a spare room, a clean bed, a folded blanket, and a note on the nightstand that read, "You're safe here." The first night, I couldn't sleep. I kept expecting her to change her mind, to call the police, to tell me I didn't deserve comfort. But when morning came, Eleanor simply said, "Coffee's ready. After that, you'll help me at the restaurant." The restaurant, the Maple Hearth, was a small, wood-paneled place downtown, filled with the smell of butter and hope. She owned it, along with 3 others scattered across Oregon. I wiped tables, washed dishes, learned to move without fear. The pay was small, but the dignity was priceless. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor began teaching me things beyond survival. How to read people. How to turn cruelty into motivation. "You don't fight fire with tears, Lydia," she said one night as we closed the register. "You build a fire bigger than theirs and control it." That sentence stayed with me. She taught me business profits, costs, contracts, but beneath every lesson was something deeper. Strategy, restraint, patience. "Never rush revenge," she'd warn, stirring her tea. "The longer they think you're broken, the easier they are to break." I absorbed everything. I learned how to dress like confidence even when I had none. I stopped trembling when men raised their voices. I started saving money, first $20, then $200, then enough to stand on my own feet again. One evening, she handed me a silver locket. Inside was a quote carved in tiny script: "Rise quietly, then roar." Her eyes softened. "You remind me of someone I used to be, Ma." That night, as rain tapped the window, I realized Eleanor Walsh hadn't just saved my life, she was building a new version of me. The girl who once begged for love was learning how to build an empire from the ashes of rejection. And somewhere deep inside, beneath gratitude and calm, a new emotion began to stir again, cold, focused, and waiting. Eleanor's lessons didn't come from books. They came from scars. Every morning at the Maple Hearth, she'd test me not with numbers but with people. "See that couple?" she'd whisper as she wiped the counter. "He's lying about something. Watch her hands." I learned how to read micro-expressions: guilt, greed, fear, like a second language. At night, she'd open her ledger and show me the business behind survival. Supply chains, inventory, payrolls. "Money," she said once, "isn't just power, it's silence. It lets you walk away without explaining a damn thing." That line stuck to my bones. By the time spring arrived, I wasn't the trembling girl who'd slept under bridges. I was sharper, deliberate, controlled. Eleanor promoted me to assistant manager, and for the first time, I signed my name on a payroll form without shame. She introduced me to her attorney, Caleb Monroe, a man in his early 40s with a dry wit and the calm eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "You'll need a legal backbone if you ever plan to own anything," Eleanor told me. "Caleb's one of the few who won't talk when it matters most." Over late-night coffee meetings, Caleb explained trusts, property rights, and loopholes in inheritance law. It felt oddly comforting learning how to protect something I didn't yet have. Meanwhile, I met Lena Ortiz, an IT specialist who handled Eleanor's digital systems. Lena was all black hoodies, fast typing, and quiet rebellion. She taught me how to trace digital footprints, scrub data, and make information disappear when needed. "Every empire leaves crumbs," she said. "Your job is to control who eats them." Eleanor watched me build friendships she knew would outlast her. She never said it out loud, but I could see it in her smile. She was training me for something bigger than survival. Then, life tested me again. It happened on a cold December morning. The pain came suddenly sharp, relentless. By the time Caleb got me to the hospital, it was too late. The baby I'd carried through those months of hunger and fear was gone. I stared at the ceiling tiles, numb. The doctors murmured condolences. I heard none of them. All I could think was my parents had killed my first child the night they threw me out. Eleanor sat beside me bed, holding my hand. Her voice was low but steady. "You lost something precious," she said, "but don't lose yourself again. You'll build something greater in your own image." It took weeks to stand again. But when I did, I wasn't the same. I was steel under skin. Eleanor helped me file adoption papers for a baby boy named Noah, abandoned at a shelter outside Salem. When I held him, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine like a promise. I whispered, "You'll never be alone like I was." From that day forward, Lydia Prescott was no longer the victim. She was a woman rebuilding her world brick by calculated brick. And every lesson Eleanor had ever taught me was about to become the foundation for an empire no one could touch. Years blurred into something steady. The ache faded, replaced by quiet precision. By her late 20s, Lydia Prescott was no longer the lost girl under the bridge. She was a name whispered in Portland's business circles. Eleanor's chain of restaurants had expanded, and Lydia had turned them digital, introducing mobile reservations, delivery systems, online branding. Her ideas multiplied profits. Investors listened when she spoke. She bought her first condo downtown, the same zip code her parents once bragged about, and smiled when she passed their old neighborhood. Not out of nostalgia, out of triumph. Noah grew fast, sharp eyes, restless mind. He'd sit by her laptop as she worked, asking what revenue meant or why people in suits argued on the news. Lydia enrolled him in coding camps, robotics programs, summer challenges across Oregon. At 10, he built a small app that tracked restaurant waste and optimized orders. At 12, he won a national tech award. Reporters called him the Oregon prodigy redefining restaurant tech. And Lydia? She stood behind the camera, watching the boy who bore her last name shine brighter than anyone she'd ever known. But fame travels fast and greed travels faster. One evening, while scrolling through business articles, Lydia froze. A headline read, "Local genius Noah Prescott partners with Innovent Group, the company owned by her parents." Her pulse slowed. It wasn't true, of course, but it meant they'd noticed him. Days later, a sleek envelope arrived at her office. Inside, a letter from Patrick and Elaine Prescott, her parents, cloaked in false affection. "We'd love to reconnect. Noah deserves to know his family." Family. The word tasted bitter. She showed it to Lena, her IT expert, who raised an eyebrow. "Want me to trace their digital trail?" Lydia smiled. "Every click, every email." Within a week, Lena uncovered searches from her parents' IP address. Grandparent rights, Oregon. Claiming inheritance through grandchildren. And legal reconnection for family estates. They weren't seeking forgiveness. They were seeking leverage. Lydia crafted her plan like Eleanor had taught her, slow, surgical, silent. She sent a carefully worded reply. "It's been a long time. I'm open to talking." Then waited. She let her tone tremble in calls, her handwriting wobble in notes. To them, she appeared vulnerable, regretful, ready to reconcile. Each emotional bait drew them closer. Meanwhile, Lena's servers recorded everything, every text, call, and financial transfer tied to the Prescott's plan. Caleb reviewed Oregon's inheritance statutes, preparing airtight trusts that would collapse any false claim. Her parents thought they were reeling her in. They didn't realize they were walking straight into her web. Then came Ryan Whitmore, the ghost from high school, now broke, desperate, and conveniently back in town. His voice message arrived one night. "Lyd, your parents reached out. Maybe it's time we talk, for Noah's sake." For Noah's sake. The irony almost made her laugh. Lydia stared out the penthouse window as rain streaked the glass. Portland's skyline glittered beneath the storm, reflections shifting like ghosts. She whispered, "You all had your chance." The trap was set. And this time, when the door slammed, she'd be the one holding the handle. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, printed on thick paper that reeked of entitlement. The Prescott family seal glared up at me, that same embossed crest Dad once said stood for legacy. Now it stood for greed. The document inside was worse than I imagined. A lawsuit, filed under grandparent visitation rights and familial financial interest. In simple terms, they were suing me for access to Noah and a portion of my company's profits. The audacity almost made me laugh. Almost. Caleb Monroe, my attorney, read through the pages without blinking. "They're citing emotional harm and family restoration clauses," he said. "Classic manipulation. They want to push you into negotiation, force you to settle." I leaned back, voice calm. "Then let's give them exactly what they want." He smiled, the kind of smile that hides strategy. "You already have a plan, don't you?" Of course I did. For weeks, Lena Ortiz had been tracking their emails. Every browser history, every encrypted chat. She'd uncovered secret conversations between my parents and Ryan Whitmore, the same boy who left me under the rain 15 years ago. They'd promised him a share of my inheritance if he helped reopen family ties. One message from Dad read, "Play her emotions. Mention the boy. She'll fold." They didn't know I'd been reading every word in real time. So I played along. I met Ryan at a coffee shop on the east side neutral ground. He looked older, hollow behind a salesman's smile. "You look different," he said. I sipped my latte. "I am different." He leaned forward. "Your parents just want to be part of Noah's life. He deserves to know where he comes from." I set my cup down. He knows where he comes from, a woman who didn't quit. He flinched. The old Ryan would have argued. The new one checked his phone, probably updating my parents like a good little informant. That night, I sent Lena a single text. "They've taken the bait." Within days, their activity spiked. Late-night calls between Ryan and Patrick Prescott. Encrypted messages about splitting potential settlements. Lena archived everything. Caleb began structuring counter-lawsuits, citing defamation, emotional distress, and extortion attempts. But the final step required patience. I leaked a fabricated document, a trust clause, stating that Noah's future assets were tied solely to my approval. Within hours, my parents' lawyer reached out for urgent mediation. They'd swallowed it whole. Caleb called it a legal snare, but to me it was art. Soon, public whispers began, rumors that the Prescotts were back in town, suing their estranged daughter for money. The same social circles they once flaunted now turned against them. The image of perfection they'd curated for decades began to crack. When the first hearing was scheduled, I looked into the mirror of my penthouse, a place I bought with my own hands, and saw not fear, but control. I pinned my hair back, straightened my blazer, and whispered to the reflection, "You threw me away. Now I get to decide who walks away." They thought this was their comeback. But for me, it was the opening act. The courtroom wouldn't just be where they sued me. It would be where I buried the last piece of who I used to be. The day of the hearing felt like déjà vu, except this time, I wasn't the girl outside the door. I was the one inside, and everyone else was about to be shut out. The courthouse in downtown Portland buzzed with reporters. My parents had leaked to the press, painting themselves as heartbroken elders yearning to reconnect with their estranged daughter and grandson. It worked for a day until I made sure it didn't. Lena had scheduled the perfect drop. Screenshots of my parents' encrypted chats with Ryan, proof of their plot to extort money. By the time the news cycle hit noon, the headlines had changed from "Family Reunites in Court" to "Prescott's Accused of Manipulative Lawsuit." Still, they showed up in polished suits, pretending to be victims. My father's jaw was tight. My mother clutched her pearls like a stage prop. Ryan stood behind them, pale and nervous, The weakest pawn in a game he didn't even understand. When Judge Reynolds entered, the room went still. Cameras clicked. The city was watching. Caleb opened our side calmly. Your Honor, before we proceed with their claim, my client requests that certain evidence be made public, as it directly pertains to the plaintiff's credibility. The judge nodded. Proceed. The courtroom lights dimmed. A projector lit up the screen behind the witness stand. And then the first email appeared. Subject: Reclaiming Lydia's Wealth. From Patrick Prescott. To Ryan Whitmore. Use the boy. Make her trust you again. Once she's softened, we'll demand legal access. If she resists, we file. A gasp rippled through the room. Reporters leaned forward like predators. Then came another voice recordings, phone calls, transaction logs, each one more damning than the last. Ryan's voice cracked over the speaker, pleading, "This isn't right, Patrick. She'll find out." And my father's cold reply, "She's too emotional to fight back." The irony stung sweetly. I stood, calm, deliberate. Your Honor, I said, voice steady. 20 years ago, they threw me out for being pregnant. They told me I was a disgrace. And now, after all this time, they came back not for love, but for money. I paused, then turned to them. You want to meet my son? Fine. But he's not yours. He's mine because I built everything you abandoned. No. The silence was deafening. Even the judge's pen froze midair. Then Caleb dropped the final blow. A notarized document signed by Patrick and Elaine Prescott 20 years prior, relinquishing all parental rights to avoid reputational damage. Their signatures glared across the courtroom screens in black and white. My mother's face drained of color. My father tried to speak. That's out of context. But his voice faltered as the crowd erupted. The judge's gavel struck once. Case dismissed. All claims denied. Then, softer but colder. And the court recommends investigation for attempted fraud. Security stepped forward. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. My parents shrank in their seats as officers escorted them out under a storm of camera lights. Ryan slipped away, head low, hunted by shame and headlines that would follow him for years. I stood still, letting it all unfold, the justice, the humiliation, the silence afterward. For the first time since I was 17, I didn't tremble. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. Portland sunlight broke through the clouds. Lena walked beside me, smiling. You did it. I looked up. No, I said quietly. We did it. I didn't just win a case. I reclaimed every piece of myself they tried to destroy. The chaos faded slowly, replaced by the quiet hum of rebuilding. Portland's skyline glittered beneath spring sunlight, and for the first time in years, I looked at it without feeling haunted. The lawsuit headlines died down. The Prescotts disappeared from social circles they once ruled. Ryan Whitmore pled guilty to tax evasion. My parents sold their lake house to pay court fees. Their empire built on image and deceit crumbled faster than they'd destroyed mine. But revenge was never meant to end with ruin. It was meant to clear the ground for something new. I kept working, expanding the maple hearth chain in Eleanor's honor. When she passed, she left me everything: her shares, her home, her name in a handwritten note that read, "Make this legacy about healing, not hate." That line reshaped everything. 6 months later, I launched the Eleanor Foundation for Women Rising, a nonprofit dedicated to single mothers and abandoned daughters across Oregon. The first grant went to a young barista named Tasha, a girl barely 20, pregnant and scared, just like I once was. When she cried in my arms, whispering, "Thank you," I realized this was what power truly meant, not to punish, but to protect. Noah stood beside me at the foundation's opening gala, now 17, tall, confident, and far wiser than I'd been at his age. His latest tech startup had already gained investment offers. He looked at me and said, "You taught me that family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up." My throat tightened. Then I did something right. Later that night, under soft golden lights, Caleb Monroe, my loyal counsel, my anchor through every storm, took my hand. "You've built everything you once dreamed of, Lydia," he said. "Not everything," I whispered. but I'm getting there. When he pulled out a ring, I didn't cry. I just smiled. Steady, sure. Yes, I said simply. The applause from friends and foundation members filled the hall. But in that noise, I felt peace, a quiet, permanent kind. I thought about the girl who once slept under bridges, whispering promises to a baby she never got to hold. About the rain that used to sting, and the hunger that used to define me. She wasn't gone. She was standing right here, reborn. I turned to the camera crew filming the gala's highlight reel, smiled through tears, and said, "You don't win by destroying your enemies. You win by surviving them." As the lights dimmed, I felt the last chains of my past dissolve into nothing. Lydia Prescott, once discarded, now unstoppable. A woman who built her throne from the ashes of her own name. And when the video ended online, I made sure the final line appeared in bold across the screen. Revenge served cold isn't about hate. It's about reclaiming your power.